and I'd like to welcome all of you to tonight's In Conservation With, and I am normally very excited. People who watch this series will know that, but today I'm super excited to have Robert Macfarlane, the celebrated writer, a guy that actually I have never met before. I follow him and he follows me on Twitter, and I took a gamble. I wrote him a note in his messages, you know, his direct mail, to ask if he'd be interested in coming on to this In Conservation With, and I never expected it. But then here you are, Robert.
Here I am, sharing screen, if not space. And hello, everybody. Lovely to see you all here. Thank you for coming. Hello, some familiar faces, some familiar names, including my mum. I've just seen. So just so you're aware, everybody, that there will be some constraints on the storytelling this evening. But hi, Mum. I didn't know you were going to be here, but you are. And hello to lots of friends and lots of new faces as well. Lovely to see you all. And hello, David. Hi.
Well, thank you very much, Robert. And Mrs. Macfarlane Senior, don't worry, there'll be no bad language or any sort of spurious stories at all. It'll be all above board. For those who do not
Are you going to watch this?
What is it?
It's Rob.
Lorcan, can you turn your mic off? Can everyone turn their mics off, please?
Okay,
Yeah.
I've got it. I can always kick your mum off if you want, Robert.
We've got bouncers, Mum.
Yeah, we'll get your mum on later, actually, if she would like to sort of verify anything you say. But anyway, for those who are not familiar with Robert, Robert is an awarded writer. I mean, I won't even bother reading the awards out because that'll take most of tonight. All I will say is that you've written 9 books, as far as I can see. Is that right?
Somewhere around that, yeah.
And your latest is Underland, which came out last year in 2019. And again, that's came out to much applause. And I'm sure that many people in tonight's chat or session would have read that book and maybe others of your books. We'll talk about your books in a minute, but let's start at the very beginning, Robert. I just want to know about you because I'm meeting you for the first time. I don't worry about books. Tonight's not about a literary festival. It's not about talking about intricate parts of your books, even though we will do, because I'm sure people in the audience may want to talk to you about aspects of your books. But tell me about how you kind of came to be fascinated with landscapes and the environment and nature. How did that start?
Yeah, well, thank you. I get asked this a lot, and it's a bit like when you're pulling up seaweeds. It never quite stops. You never reach the end of the seaweed, and so I never know quite where that story begins. But it begins with my parents. I know it doesn't. The seaweed leads back to my grandparents, and then to their parents, and so my great grandparents grew up in remote parts of Scotland. My Scottish grandparents moved to England, and my English grandparents moved to Scotland, where they lived for 30 years on and off on the slopes of the Cairngorms, within earshot of curlew and many other species that I remember from those early years. Dippers on the River Arn. And my parents, really, I think, is the short answer. We grew up for most of my childhood years in a sort of semi-small holding. There were sheep that grazed on the 4-acre field, and Mum had a horse, and we lived at the end of a country lane. And I didn't much like it. The blackthorn, stung me, and the mosquitoes ate us, and I didn't sort of get nature. Although I now see that it was getting me, as it were.
Was that in Northamptonshire?
Nottinghamshire. So. Yeah. So we grew up in sort of coal mining country, or on the border of that, and but we were heading to the mountains. That's where we were going whenever there was a chance. Really, the mountains and the islands, mostly of Scotland, but Wales and Ireland as well. So it was just very natural to head up onto heather and moor and crag and coast and have a birthday there or a week there. And I think that's soaked pretty deep. And then books is the other answer, because I've always read my way into places as well as walked my way into places, as well as dream my way into places. And books, you know, they're very powerful guides. Whether they're you know, I don't know, what was the book that led you into birds first? Do you remember?
There wasn't a book actually, because I don't think I could read at the time, because I think I was actually born interested in birds from a previous life. Because I think I was a puma in a previous life, you see.
You think you were what?
I was a puma.
You were a puma, okay.
Yeah, I used to chase after birds, and one day I missed one and it flew off, and I thought, wow, it looks amazing. So I started watching birds as a puma, but it led to my demise. And I thought, as I was dying, this is a very interesting little thing I got into here. Maybe I can try and take it up in the next situation. Luckily, I was born in northwest London, so it kind of went from there.
That's a great answer. Well, I don't know whether I had a previous life. If I did, I would have loved to have lived as a curlew, I think, and not crossed the path of a puma. I'm not sure how possible that was, but.
Do you not have a seminal moment? Do you remember, like as a kid, walking down a path or looking at a vista or something, and that leaving an impression on you?
Yeah, I do, and it is the Cairngorms, and I can think of looking across from where my grandparents lived, and there was purple of the heather, gold of the gorse, call of the curlews, and the river, the big river just down the slope, which we would swim in when we were up there. And you know, these things print deeply, don't they? So you know, I just knew that was a place I loved. And lapwing as well. Lapwing have been there all the while, even as they've been declining. I associate them very strongly with that part of my life and that part of the country.
It's funny because I'm in Spain, as you probably know. I'm in Extremadura in southwest Spain. It's currently outside 29 degrees as we speak, but in here it's pretty cool. But anyway, lapwing is interesting because in Spain they call it ave frío, cold bird, and it comes during the winter. And for me, used to seeing lapwings, you know, in farmland in southern England, to see them, you know, on really hot sort of rice fields in southern Spain, you know, it really does throw your mind into a bit of a twist, really, because you associate them with a particular type of habitat. Is
it Vanellus vanellus? Is that?
Yeah.
Yeah, which is the little fan. It's kind of I think that's right. It's another of these beautiful scientific names, but I always think of them as dominoes that get thrown by this invisible hand, and that white tumbling white and black. And whenever I'm back up in Scotland, they're always the birds I look for on the fields and the marshes. Yeah.
But your first book, which was Mountains of the Mind, which I think is a really amazing title, actually. It's a very evocative title. And obviously the word mountains is in the title, so it shows that mountains meant a lot to you. Without giving away not so much the premise, but giving away the punchline or whatever, why do you think people are drawn to mountains and dangerous precipices? I mean, that's what you've written about in this book.
Yeah. Thanks, Sean, for that comment in the chat which just popped up. But yeah,
mountaineering.
Yeah, about mountaineering, really. And first of all, the title's not mine. It's Gerard Manley Hopkins, who's one of the great poets of nature of the 19th, 20th centuries in English, I think, and there's still a huge influence on me. Anyone who's read The Lost Words will hear the kennings and the tumbling tones of Gerard Manley Hopkins there. So he suffered desperately from depression at times, and in the end burnt a lot of his work. And he wrote a series of sonnets called the so-called Despair Sonnets. And one of those, they're incredible sort of psychodramas in poetic form, but one of them, there is a line, "Oh, the mind has mountains in it." And that idea, which to Hopkins at the time, these were mountains of sheer fall. Effectively, these were desperate places. But mountains are places of joy and wonder as well as danger and death. So I wanted to write about both sides of that. But this idea that we dream mountains into being, I found incredibly powerful, because we do this with all landscapes. We imagine them before we get to them, or we imagine them after we've been to them and distort them in all sorts of ways. But with mountains, the contrast is particularly powerful, because people dream that mountains love them back, when of course they don't. They imagine themselves willing to risk, as I was at times, briefly, limb, even life, for love of mountains. And that is when you look at it from the outside, it's a profound, puzzling idiocy, or a mystery, if you want to dignify it like that. And I remember the moment I realized I really wanted to write it was I was mountaineering in Kyrgyzstan, in Central Asia, with a team that I was leading them. They were really inexperienced. I was completely insufficient to this huge glaciated range that we were in. And it was just very obvious that we were mismatched, and we were going to be in danger if we carried on trying to do what we wanted to do. And I came up this glacier upon a cemetery, a kind of mountaineers cemetery. You get these all over mountaineering regions of the world, basically, where people have died and little memorials have been scratched into rock to them. Little stories are told, little offerings are left, candles and dolls and bits of mountaineering equipment, and they're kind of both very poignant and rather pathetic places. And I remember staring at this and seeing there was the memorial to a man who died who was not much older than me, and I just suddenly was struck by the kind of absurdity of it and the strangeness of it. I looked outside and in on myself and on the mountaineering world, and I suddenly thought, what is this? What an enigma! What a puzzle to anyone looking in from the outside. And I thought, I've got to try and explain this, if only to myself.
Well, that's interesting. I mean, the thing is, for me, I mean, I've come to, I think, all of this kind of literary stuff late in life, because I went to a rubbish school in northwest London where we weren't really taught about anything to do with literary stuff, nothing really. We just basically, it was a school that was churning out people to work in factories. And it makes me think about when you write these books, when you write a book, who are you writing to? Do you think about who's going to read it? Or is it one of those things you just have to put out and not care who reads it, if you know what I'm saying? It's just a personal feeling that you need to put on paper.
Before I answer that, so you were born, or even before you were born, you were chasing birds. But was that all the way through this school that you were at? So birds were just part of your eyes and your mind, even when you were at this school?
Yeah, I mean, I went to primary school and secondary school. The primary school, birds were totally, I mean, I found a book on birds of Britain, Europe, Middle East and North Africa when I was, I think, 7 years old. I took it from the library. I still have it now, actually, in the bookshelf, but I did try to return it a few years ago, but the library closed. Actually, when I say closed, it was shut down. But I read the book during my lessons. I was just totally enthralled by the idea of all these different types of birds. So I just read that, and that was all consuming for me. I just grabbed as much information as I could. And when I went to secondary school, you weren't encouraged really to do anything else. So you're often told that you're going to be a failure. I mean, I was told several times that I wouldn't amount to much. And I remember going to careers office, the careers teacher with my mum, and he said to me, "What do you want to do, David?" I said, "Well, I'd actually like to be a vet." And he said, "Vet, you're going to have to be studying even longer than being a doctor. I think that you should be a bricklayer or a carpenter." So that was the sort of, the help I was getting. So it stunted my kind of development to the point that I didn't actually read much. And even to this day, I don't read as much as I should do at all, because I just didn't have it in my kind of genes. And plus, you know, I don't think I was ever read to either. So it's interesting how, you know, how we all develop as people. And it just makes me think about when you write, obviously there's a certain audience that reads your book, but do you think about reaching out to different audiences? Do you think about that?
Looking over your shoulder, which I know you shouldn't do as a matter of etiquette on Zoom calls, but it looks like you read a fair bit these days. I did that psychometric careers test as well, and it returned that I was recommended to become either a zookeeper or a prison warder, which are both very admirable careers. But anyway, I didn't take its advice, so and neither did you. So to be ignored, I think. It's a really good question, really hard one to answer. On the one hand, I have one reader in mind when I'm writing a book. It's almost like this quasi-sacred figure who isn't a person in the real world, but just hovers there. And whenever I've got a question about something I've written, I say, do you get this? Do you follow this? Or does this image work for you? And that figure, who isn't me, answers that question for me. So in that sense, I've got a kind of tester there for me. And I don't know whether that's some projection of my own self-critical mind or not. But the other answer is I don't any longer, because I set myself a puzzle to answer, and then that now takes me the best part of nearly 600 pages with underlined. And if the puzzle in Mountains of the Mind is why do people climb mountains, the puzzle in the puzzle, or the two puzzles in Underland, are why have we been drawn into darkness as humans for as long as we've been human, and what are we leaving behind for the future? And those are tricky questions, and I just set out to answer them as best I can in language and by listening as well to many people as I go.
Yeah.
So yeah,
we'll talk about Underland shortly. Just want to go back to your writing again, because, for example, I mean, I'm not nowhere near your league at all in terms of writing, but when I write anything, I think about my mum. I think if she can understand this, then I'm happy. If she'll buy it, I don't care, as long as she buys it. So that's where I come from. But where did your love of obviously the words and English language come from? Was it something that you kind of developed whilst being taught English and English literature, or did you actually just love language from day one?
Yeah, I should say, Mum, hello, Mum, and Dad, they've been incredible supporters of mine, and they're just amazing. Sort of always, there's some of my first readers of everything I do, and they always read everything in draft still. They read my first terrible poems when I was 16. 14, and still should have known better. Poem about a cougar stalking a penguin, which really just doesn't happen in the world. So they've been critical occasionally, but generally wonderful readers. What was the question about, apart from my mum? Sorry, are you mum?
Sorry, it was about where did your love of words?
Oh yeah. Well, I would say a teacher. I mean, I am a teacher, but not necessarily a very good one. But I just have the hugest admiration for teachers. We've been rethinking what our key workers are over the past 3 to 4 months, very, very radically. And we know that they're shelf stackers and ambulance drivers and blood donors and people working in pharmacies and all these new front lines that we knew existed but just weren't recognised. But teachers are one of those. My goodness, primary school teachers and librarians, what utter heroes. I had a really wonderful teacher called Gary Martin, who he put strange words in my way. Ian McEwan, Seamus Heaney, Ted Hughes, Hopkins, writers like this, for whom language was something you tasted, something you picked up, something you could throw, something you could make clay out of in the air, and mold it into new shapes. And that was pretty revelatory. So, a great teacher introducing me to great writing made me understand that words words could be worked, and
Yeah.
that they were forces of their own.
So when did you actually start thinking that you could be a writer?
When I was convinced that I mustn't be a lawyer. I think that is. I mean, yeah, talk about the why fork. But the devil, as it were. Sorry, Patrick Lim. The devil beckoned me thrice, and I did 3 kinds of work experience in various legal capacities, and at the end of the third of those, I realised that I just couldn't do this. So I made 2 vows to myself at the end of that. I was probably 21 at that point. I vowed I'd never get a job where I had to wear a tie to work, and I vowed I'd never live in London. And then I made a hope, and my hope was that I would have something to do with books and words, and those were the 3 vows about 21, 2 negative and 1 positive, and they pretty much all come true. I've just seen my mum says she's got copies of those early poems, so Mum, just keep them in that folder, all right? And do not copy them.
One question I always ask writers is that when they're in the process of writing, when you write something, do you actually think to yourself, do you think it's good, or are you really, really critical of yourself?
I think now I know when something's worked, whether that be at the level of the sentence or at the level of a book. And I think that's because I am a critic as well as a writer. I mean, I spend a lot of my time teaching literature, and I know what a sentence should weigh, and I put it on those scales in my mind, my own sentences here, and I can tell if it's a gram or a tenth of a gram out normally now. That doesn't mean I can get it the right weight, but it means I know if it's the wrong weight, and that really annoys me. So that's why I have to spend so long on these sentences, but I still don't get the weight right all the time.
And when you are working on a book project, what happens to you? What kind of metamorphosis happens to you in your processes?
I'm a magpie first. So I gather and gather and gather and gather and pick up shiny things and raid other nests, and that can last for years. And I chatter a lot as the magpie. And then there comes a phase, normally a year or so, where I become a monk. I don't know what the bird version of that would be, but what's a monkish bird?
Something that hides away. Well, one bird that's hardly ever seen is the plains wanderer in Australia.
Okay.
Hardly ever seen.
Okay.
Child to see one, apparently. Lucky git.
Maybe I become the wren, troglodytes, and head into my cave. I don't know, but then I really do enter a very sort of intense phase with it. The oil bird, yeah. Well, I hide and I just work the material for many months, and then I'm never satisfied with it. And then there comes a point where I start to bring other readers in, people I trust very much, including my parents, my editors, and so forth. And then, so yeah, there's the open phase and the monk mode. I tend to call it. I sort of tell my friends, I say I'm entering monk mode now. It only happens about once every 5 years, but.
Well, if you have a dry period, your mum's got some poems that she can publish for you.
Yes.
Underland was your most recent book, and incredible, I thought. For those who don't know about the book, it's a journey into the worlds beneath our feet, which I think is a really interesting concept. Where did that come from?
Well, it came. It came in a way because it's the opposite of mountains, and I spent the best part of 2 decades working from high to low. So there's a sort of gravitational answer there. Mountains remain my love, and the darkness below is a kind of hate, but hate is fascinating too. I think many people are highly averse to all that lies beneath us, but it's where we put the things we love most are dead, as well as where we put the things we fear and hate most, our traumas, our nightmares, our waste products. And I think I wanted to write a book or begin thinking in a way that was really grappled with some of the complications of the current age, as it were, the Anthropocene, if we want to call it that, an age of huge contrasts of light and dark, and damage and loss, hope and wonder and possibility. And so I needed to write a book about those things, and that's what it became. Yeah.
And you actually went underground, didn't you? You went to a few locations and actually experienced it for yourself. What was that like? I mean, I know that if I went into a catacombs, in fact, I did go into one in Kensal Green Cemetery in West London to look for bats. And I was with this lady who was a bat expert. And although I wasn't afraid, I wasn't worried about being in the cemetery at night, there was something about going into a catacomb and seeing tombs with the lids pushed open and gates for the rooms that they're in open, and that eerie silence and the dark light, that kind of unnerved me a bit. So did you kind of get frightened, or was it you kind of facing up to fears? Was this some kind of metaphor for you?
Yeah, a little bit. Just out of interest, when you were in the crypt or the catacomb, was it? I mean, did you feel? Was it hauntedness? I mean, was it superstition, if we want to call it that, or was it a feeling of trespass? Or,
you know, that's a good question. I didn't, as I said, I didn't feel worried about being in the cemetery per se. I think looking at some of the tombs that were slightly pushed open as if, you know, Dracula had come out for the evening, I felt a bit weird. And plus, the woman I was with was very cavalier and very sort of, and she was telling me stories about the Père Lachaise. Is that the one in Paris? Père Lachaise? Or?
Oh yeah.
She's telling me that people have gone into that one and been lost for a couple of days. And I was thinking, oh, don't tell me that. So I think she kind of put the fear into me a little bit. But I must admit, I wouldn't like the idea of potholing or going into any confined space underground, because I think, although I don't think I'm claustrophobic, I just wouldn't like that, you know, being dark and underneath and in danger. It's the danger, I think, that would really frighten me.
Well, Gayatri on the chat has asked about danger, and she says, how did you manage to convince your family to let you go into the Underland? And the answer is that cricket is a far more dangerous sport than potholing. For me, I've broken many more ribs playing cricket, ridiculous game that it is, than I have broken bones climbing mountains. So I think the answer is I was only ever once in danger in all the years of writing Underland. And otherwise it's a case of being in fear, which is different to being in danger. And fear I have a fair bit of experience of from the mountains. It's horrible, absolutely horrible. It's kind of fascinating as well, though. It's almost a sort of narcotic, a sharpener, an upper. I don't seek it out in the way that Al Alvarez describes it. He wrote a famous book called Feeding the Rat. Feeding the rat is a climber's term for when you have to feed the rat with fear. That's what it thrives on. It lives inside you. But the more you feed it with fear, the bigger the rat grows. And so you have to feed it with more fear and more fear. I was never one of the feeding the rat climbers, partly because I was rubbish at climbing. Primo Levi, actually, one of the great writers of the 20th century and survivor of the concentration camps, he was a climber. He writes an incredible chapter in his astonishing book, The Periodic Table, about climbing. It's the element iron. Each chapter is an element in the periodic table. And he was a climber before he ended up in the camps. And he calls it eating bear meat. And for him, it's this incredible process of meeting fear and not growing the need for it, but growing from it, and just occasionally in the underland, I recognised a little of what Levy was talking about.
What makes a good climber? I mean, the only climbing I've done on mountains is basically walking up a path.
Yeah, well, there are many kinds of climber. You've got your hill walkers, of whom I'm, basically one, and then you've got your sort of winter mountaineers, who are, of whom I'm sometimes one. But then you have your rock climbers, who are basically gymnasts, vertical dancers, incredible technical athletes, and then you have your real hardcore mountaineers, who are the people who climb big mountains and using an extraordinary mix of sort of stamina and technical skill to move up astonishing faces and ridges. So there are many kinds of climber. Yes, among the hardcore ones, there's there are no old bold climbers, etc. So that's not quite true. But I could never have been one of those people, and never wanted to. But it did make me fascinated by fear.
Why wouldn't you live in London? Talking about fear.
Oh, I'm not very good with cities generally. Not in a. I mean, I live on the outskirts of one now, Cambridge, but it's a bit of a different city to London, a bit smaller. I could never live in the country, I don't think, again. But I do, and I love what Cambridge brings me. But London would beat me down in the end. I'm not up to it. So, but tell me, should I tell me why I should love London?
Well, the thing is, I think I'm kind of done with London personally. I love London. London's made me what I am today, and I'll always be grateful. And whenever people ask me what's the best city in the world for birding, I always put London up there.
Ah.
But I think that, currently I'm in a city called Merida in Extremadura, 70,000 people. It's a huge village, mostly low rise. Most people know each other around here, it seems. And, it's like a really good hybrid of rural and city to me. And I think for me personally, even though I've branded myself the urban birder, I love the countryside. And I think I saw what I could as a kid of countryside in the city, and it kind of went from there. So, down the road from where I lived was a park, and across the river from the park, which was actually a concrete basin, was some sort of disused ground, rough ground, with rubble and stuff like that, and that was my countryside. So I think I've seen it in the reverse. I'm just seeing the negative, positive side of it. I've seen the opposite side of it. So yeah, but in London's an interesting place. But I think it's more of a place you should be when you're younger, personally, and then move from there.
We talked a bit when we spoke last week. Talked about this. I mean, a lot of people have talked about the new forms of sort of sensitivity and perception that lockdown brought, when suddenly the noise was removed from ambient noise of traffic, and air traffic was removed. It was a very sunny April and May here in Britain. More and more people were confined to their houses, in some cases to their gardens, and there was suddenly this amazing upsurge of look at the birds. And I remember thinking, yeah, London, I mean, it's nearly got as many trees as it has people. It's a wildwood of a city, and how amazing that people are hearing them. And there are crazy things happening in South Cambridge. We had this I think I told you, we had this red-legged partridge, French partridge as I grew up calling them, that turned up on our roof ridge, just calling calling every morning. I saw swifts having sex for the first time above the garden, and probably for the last time. All 1.5 fabulous airborne seconds of it, which I'm told is a rare sight.
Called a cloacal kiss.
Yeah, it was pretty much a kiss, but the job was done. And suddenly I learnt more about the way birds organised themselves around me, around the garden. I started to read the sky in terms of depths, different depths that birds used and inhabited. And I've always been very conscious of them, but suddenly they became there were new architectures visible, new structures, new birds, and goldfinches and greenfinches turned up for the first time, and lots of reasons for that. But it was, yeah, it's been great. Have you had a lot of people in cities coming to you and saying, "Wow, I never realised, you know, the bird song, the bird life"?
Every day, particularly during the hardcore part of lockdown, every day, several times a day, you know, not only media, but people, friends and other people, you know, cold, sending me messages saying that I've noticed so much. But I had a guest on about, back in April, Chris Watson, who is,
Hey.
yeah, you know, Chris Watson, he's
Yeah,
David, amongst other things, David Attenborough's sound man. And he was really interesting because he talked about the fact that, you know, he was hearing more birds singing, and he had a microphone put in his apple tree, and a blackbird was singing right down the barrel, and he played it back to us, which was amazing. But then he said, the thing is, the birds themselves can hear other birds, where in the past they couldn't because of the sound of traffic and the ambient humanity noises. So they were singing even more vociferously and more vibrantly because they realized that they had more competition. Made it sound to all of us that there were more birds and they were much more lively, but that's maybe one of the reasons why they were doing that.
That's
so
fascinating.
It is absolutely fascinating. But going back to Underland, I mean, even your previous books, it's clear that you've got a massive love for the UK and Scotland in particular. Yeah. And I note that in Underland, I think even you said that it's the first book you've ever written without mentioning much about Scotland.
Yeah, that's right.
And also you went to some other locations. You were in Spain, and was it Palestine as well?
Palestine in the old ways, yeah, in the old ways, but also in a lot in Central and Eastern Europe, Italy, Slovenia, and then up in the north, Finland, Greenland, and Arctic Norway as well.
And how do you find those landscapes compared to Scotland, for example? Have you got a favourite, or is it all kind of just versions of each other?
Well, yeah, that's a really fascinating. I mean, I've said somewhere in a book called Landmarks, I think it is, that I'm quite north-minded. I'm drawn to high altitudes and high latitudes. I like rocky places, cold places, icy places, sea places. Kabir Kaul is on the chat, so I'll just break in and say hello, Kabir, who is an amazing young urban birder who will be known to you, David. And yeah, and Kabir and I have been in touch in the past, and Kabir is celebrating London's birds and its urban paradise, and talking about the black redstarts, the migratory woodcock you can find, and so thank you for that. And just to say, yes, it's to be absolutely clear, my dislike of London is my failing, not London's, and so one day I'd love to go for a London bird walk with David and with Kabir.
Yeah, we'll have to do that, definitely. Dr. Shalu Verma has asked, who are the authors that have influenced your writing the most? And did you read Baker's Peregrine, which I have there actually, and despair, feeling intimidated at just how perfect writing could be? It's funny because that book is a bit of a, well, people either love it or hate it. It is very much a very polarizing book.
Particularly among birders, I think.
Yeah. I mean, anyway, to answer her question.
Oh, it's a great question, yeah. Well, the Baker's Peregrine is this sort of incandescent prose poem that lasts 160 pages or whatever. And yeah, here it comes. And it's, there it is, along with the diaries, which are incredible themselves, and The Hill of Summer, his book about summer. But it's a very perfect book, and it certainly taught me something about intensity of language. And it's one of the favourite books of Werner Herzog, the great filmmaker, and that interests me very much because it shows how writing can be powerfully cinematic. And Baker's really is, it is like a sort of cinema on the eye. It's these amazing juddering, flashing images, and it is a sort of prose poem. So I learned a lot in that respect. But also people have heard me here, I'm sure, talk about Nan Shepherd's The Living Mountain, which is also about the same length, 50 to 60,000 words, not much longer. written by a woman in Scotland, in the northeast of Scotland, in the 1940s, and is completely different to the peregrine. It is meditative, philosophical. It's peregrinatory in the sense that it wanders, like the peregrine, the wander bird, as it is in German, the Wanderfalken.
Wonderful.
Yeah, beautiful term for it. So I should say, talking of peregrines, we have this pair in Cambridge. They began, to my delight, on the university library about 6-7 years ago. They turned up and nested really high on the library. So two of my favourite things came together, which were books and peregrine falcons. And I could go and look for books on the sort of 8th floor, and then peer out of a window, and a little window, and there would be the peregrine's nest, and I knew where it was. And they've now moved to the centre of Cambridge, and they've successfully fledged 3 chicks this year, about 15 feet above ground level. Love the Gothic architecture. It's a kind of sea cliff to them, or a crag. They've got, pigeons for the McDonald's drive-through, and then if they want some exotic food, they go out to Wicken Fen and pick up a woodcock or a golden plover or something. And I was in town for the first time a few days ago, and of course the town is completely empty. There's no one there. So I went to see the peregrines because I wanted to see some old friends. And there was one of the chicks on the stonework, 15 feet above me, same colour as the stone, a gargoyle basically. And underneath the nest site, as you can imagine, it was just absolute carnage. There were just legs and heads and everything. There was a ringed leg, presumably I think from a pigeon, racing pigeon, a jackdaw leg. It was a kind of fabulous charnel house, and it was something wonderful about seeing this species back in the cities, even as it's persecuted in the uplands still.
Yeah, I mean, its rise has been phenomenal, because back in after the Second World War, I think the population in the UK was down to maybe 60 pairs, something ridiculously low. And then they got hit again in the 50s and 60s by the DDT poisoning.
Yeah.
But then they've slowly began to rise in numbers, and they discovered urban areas, and thankfully when they're nesting in urban areas and they've got plenty of food, they're safe. It's only when they actually drift out of the urban areas, especially up in the north, and unfortunately fly over places where they do their grouse shooting, they tend to be not appreciated, if I can say that. But sorry,
David, I just wanted to say, unfortunately, I think while you've been away, actually, but this year there's been a tax with it on city peregrines. I think in Belper, city peregrines were shot. So it's a sort of isolated incident, but I was just really worried to see different kinds of persecution coming into the city peregrines as well. But anyway, so I just thought I'd mention they're not entirely safe in the cities. Although, in a lovely counterpoint to that, one of the fledglings fell from the nest about 6 days ago in Cambridge, and there was a well-established. I know you're very careful about handling fledglings, but there was a well-established protocol from the local trust, and it was saved and is now back in the nest and safe again. So
yeah. That's awful about the persecution in urban areas. I remember when I went to Derby Cathedral, and they were telling me about the peregrines there. And initially, when they first started nesting, the vicar was finding the heads of all these birds every morning outside the church, and he thought it was some sort of demonic scenario going on until they realised that they were peregrines nesting. You talked about film previously, and you've actually worked on a film, haven't you? You worked on a film called Mountain, was it?
I've worked on a few films now. I wrote a film called Mountain that was adapted really from Mountains of the Mind, and then I made a film called Upstream, set in the Cairngorms, which is about following the River Dee against its flow back up to the spring site. It has the highest spring sites of any major river. It's about 4,000 feet on the Cairngorm Plateau. Very holy place, really, in a sort of secular sense of that word. To me, the miracle of any spring site is amplified when it's at 4,000 feet and the mountain is brewing a great river from its insides. And then I'm just working on another film also about rivers, with the same team that I made Mountain with. So I love collaborating, basically. I love collaborating with musicians, filmmakers, people who are good at things that I'm not good at, which is basically everything apart from putting words in order every now and then.
So with the films, what are you actually doing on those films?
So I write the scripts. They tend to be, all of them are three-way collaborations. So we work very closely with musicians. So Hauschka, in the case of Upstream, who's an Oscar-nominated German composer pianist, and then we worked with the Australian Chamber Orchestra. Had a live premiere of Mountain in the Sydney Opera House with the Australian Chamber Orchestra playing the score live. And then working again on a film of Underland at the moment, which is we were just getting started when Corona hit, so that'll take a while now.
Okay, right. Let me quickly ask around now for all the Zoomers in the room. Any questions for Robert at this point? Brian Banks says many of your ideas, perspectives are right out of landscape geography. Underland could have been conceived by a geographer. Have you been influenced by any geographers in particular?
Yeah, I mean, I'd love to be a geographer. I think I'd love to defect fully, and I love it when geographers like what I do. But I think cultural geography has been a big influence on me. Dennis Cosgrove was a pioneer of cultural geography, and then some of the younger brilliant writers, Caitlin De Silva, Hayden Lorimer, John Wiley, and the anthropologist, ethnographer Tim Ingold as well. So these are people writing in predominantly academic fields, but for me they bring an intensity of intellectual analysis, but also a creativity of writing to bear that I learn a lot from. I would certainly not be half the writer I am, however much of a writer I am, if I didn't live half of my time within the university learning from students and colleagues all the time.
Okay. George has asked, would you describe your work as nature writing, or do you think the term is in need of an update?
Yeah, it's definitely in need of an update. Yeah,
Nan Shepherd, etc.
Yeah, well, these days I always say that nature writing is both a tautology and a brand in a way. It's a tautology because everything is nature, really. And so when we say nature writing, we really mean writing. So if people ask me what I am, if I'm a nature writer, I tend to say, no, I'm a writer. I mean, in Underland, the nature is everything from uranium-235 decay chains to ice to Arctic terns. They're all there. And then you look at someone like Dara McAnulty, whose amazing book, Diary of a Young Naturalist, just
14 years old, isn't he?
Well, not any longer, but he was. When he wrote much of it, and it's been a joy to watch Dara just take the world by storm, as everyone who ever met him or read him knew he would, in the loveliest sense of that phrase. And his book is, come out during lockdown and has found its way to people's hearts and minds in that time. Is Dara a nature writer? Well, yes, he writes about nature, but he also writes about being human in the world, being young in the world, being anxious in the world, about wonder, about fear, all of the things that we all write about, I guess. So I think I don't find it a very useful phrase anymore.
Okay, Joyce says, in all the locations you've travelled as part of research for your books, were you most afraid? Where were you most afraid, and how did you use the experience in your writing?
Hi, Joyce. Lovely to see you here. Well, I think the answer is certain. Well, the answer is in the Lofoten chapter of Underland, where I really found myself outbid by the Arctic, and I was on my own, and I had no means of contact with the outside world. I was trapped on a storm side shore with a very, very difficult mountain crossing to get back out, and that was a difficult place, and I learned a lot about how to handle those feelings of peril there, and I did, but that it was not a glorious episode at all, but it was a very, very intense one and led to one of the most extraordinary times in that book, I think, for me.
Yeah. I can't believe it. We actually got Dara here. Do
Ah,
you want to come online for a sec, Dara? Want to come say hello?
don't worry if not, Dara. Come afterwards if you'd like.
Come on the after show then if you want.
Hey,
He's there.
Hello.
Oh, hello, sir.
Hi.
How are you? Congratulations on your book, by the way.
Thank you.
hey, Dara. How you doing?
I'm doing good. I'm pretty tired at the moment, so it's
I bet you are. What a few months, eh?
yeah, it's been crazy. I'm sorry, I'm just completely out of it today.
What's been the most amazing sort of response you've had from the book so far?
I think it's like when people give me compliments, any kind of compliments, I kind of like compliments don't really do anything to me almost. I just keep on going in the exact same way. So, but I think I think what really strikes me is when people have read my book and they've come back to me saying that it's done something, because that's basically my goal in everything, is to have done something. And if I've changed any part of anybody's mind, or have helped them think in any new or different or interesting way, then that is the greatest compliment you can possibly give me, because then I feel like I've done something. But of course I don't want to take away from what Rob was saying. I'm really, really thanking you for complimenting me, and I'm just it's been really, really crazy, and I'm sorry if I'm a little bit out of it today, but I've had some mouse problems.
It's wonderful to have you here, Dara.
Yeah, great to see you. Great to see you.
And I know that feeling when someone writes and says, your book made me do this or see this or think this. That's the best. That's the proof, isn't it?
That is the best.
Yeah.
Yes, that is.
Good. Okay. Well,
Okay,
thank you very much, Dara, for saying hello. Maybe we'll speak again at the end.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye. See you later. Nice to see you. Robert, your namesake, Anjali, is asked, do you meditate, or is your whole work just naturally meditative?
Yeah, hi Anjali, nice surname. I should say Anjali is not of my family though.
No, she comes from a great dynasty, I can tell you that.
Anjali, I don't think you were here when my mum is also in the room. So three Mcfarlanes. No, I don't meditate, but I do run a lot. And I guess I do a lot of thinking when I'm running, a lot of resetting when I'm running. So that's probably, yeah, I don't sleep much. Caffeine and running are my my uppers and soothers.
Okay, Martin Devine, you have a question.
Yes, thank you, David. Hello, Robert.
Hello.
Could I just like to pick up on this action idea. Thank you for writing landmarks. Terrific, and particularly the lost words, how that's flowed through into the lost words and spell songs. And I just would like your thoughts about, there's been quite a lot of talk about engagement with nature increasing. Might it be engagement as a consumer rather than a doer? When we look at all the studies that are out there saying all people, 90% of people value being in the outdoors, and 93% say it makes me feel good, and so forth. But then whatever 8% are members of environmental organisations or whatever. So is there something there seems to be something in your work about, and in your other interests, action for conservation, for example.
Yeah.
I mean, is there anything more? How much more is there to do on that?
Well, it's a huge question. It's a really good one. I think absolutely, the commodification of nature, the consumption of nature, in a sense, probably everyone here is to some, and certainly I am to some greater or lesser extent, a consumer of nature as well as a protector, a lover, and so on and so forth. And I think it's easily kitchified into a lifestyle choice, a sort of consumer diet. So I think I will answer this impossible question in two ways. I think one is that I continue to believe that literature can, and art and cultural work around these questions can have huge and unexpected outcomes. I happen to have been involved in one of those, which is the Lost Words, but there are many other examples of how a piece of art can end up, as you put it, flowing through and actually creating systemic and structural change. But it doesn't always happen. In fact, it pretty rarely happens. And the other is that I think that you're absolutely right, that there can't be a sort of a leaning back on culture to do systems change work. And that's why I continue to think some of the most important writing I do and some of the luckiest stuff I'm involved with are filling out risk assessment forms in triplicate for Action for Conservation, which is a youth conservation charity that is dedicated to taking people from wonder through action to change. And that's a really difficult chain to build. It takes a huge effort. So and Action for Conservation is doing a really good job at it at the moment, including increasing participation from BAME backgrounds, minority backgrounds, which, as we know, is a huge challenge in the conservation sector. So I admire the work they're doing. I'm happy to be part of it. But you're right, everyone needs to keep asking, is this just love, or is there more to be done other than love?
Thank you.
It's a really good question. Thank you.
Okay, we're going to do one more question before we kind of go into the after show bit. Julia Fraser's asked, you write about lost words and in a way lost worlds, Holloway's, the old ways, the underland. Do you see yourself in part as a keeper of the flame, or for lost, keeper of the flame for lost, or forgotten things? Lost things.
Yeah, lost or forgotten, keeper of the flame for lost or forgotten things. Yes, well, I think we should be very careful about what we lose. I mean, shifting baseline syndrome, this concept that many people will be familiar with, originated in fishing ecology study, whereby we gradually naturalize and familiarize that which we have lost. So we just become more, and each generation or each new perceiver becomes used to living in a ecologically impoverished world, and therefore you don't notice the scale of the losses. And I'm sure David will pick up a birding book from the early 20th century or the late 19th century, Richard Jefferies' Nature Near London or something from the 1880s, and just the staggering volume of bird life on the fringes of London, just 1,000-strong flocks of lapwing, and just numbers that we don't see anymore. So that's when shifting baseline syndrome becomes really visible as a concept. So I do think I care about lost things, but I also care about things that are being left, so legacies that are being left right now. So Underland's main preoccupation is with the question that Jonas Salk asks: are we being good ancestors? What are we leaving behind? And Corona has shaken and shaped all of us in the past few months, and I think has asked all sorts of questions of many of us about what we value as individuals and within the societies and polities that we're part of, and what we're leaving. So there's a huge opportunity ahead of us for change, but also tired people fighting entrenched systems. It's going to be a crucial year ahead, I think.
Do you think people will take those changes on board? Do you think that people are realizing the changes needed, obviously, whilst under stress during this whole pandemic. But then once it calms down, they go back to their old lives, and the memories become very short.
Yeah, well, I think both of those things. I think change. There are two forces for change that are coursing through society at the moment, and one is Black Lives Matter protests and associations around structural racism, which is gaining huge traction and leading to really significant systemic change, certainly in America and increasingly here. That's really, really interesting. Corona, there really is an opportunity to build back better, as they are saying, particularly in terms of cities. And I think we will see big changes in the way cities exist. But it's a chaotic moment, and yeah, change is going to be hard for the good. Is going to be hard to bring about. Just got to keep focusing and keep trying.
Okay. All right. Well, listen, we're going to talk about songs, music, and all that sort of stuff shortly. But what I'm going to do now is ask you the closing questions for the main part of this particular program. And they are very difficult questions. So are you ready for this, Robert?
Possibly.
What is your favourite bird?
I think it's the curlew. Yeah, it's close run thing between the peregrine and the curlew, but I'm going to go spirit animal curlew. Yeah.
And if you could be anywhere in the world, notwithstanding COVID-19, where would you be right now?
Cairngorm Plateau. Actually, no, it's mid-season. Ah, dear, that's problematic. Yeah, that rather knocks that one out. Actually, maybe one of the Welsh islands off Pembrokeshire, Stockholm or Skoma.
That's a good choice. Good choice. Okay, just to let you guys know, we're going to be closing this in a minute and then going into the party, after show party. But just to let you know, but tomorrow we've got Jack Perks, who is all about fish. He's going to be talking about Britain's fish tomorrow. On Monday, I've got a guy called Matt Merritt, who is the editor of Birdwatching magazine, which is the biggest selling birdwatching magazine in the whole world. And he's going to be talking about what's it like to edit a magazine about birds, believe it or not. On Tuesday, we've got a guy called Edward Mayer, who's all about swifts, and he's going to be talking about how we can save our swifts. On Wednesday, Caroline Lucas MP will be talking with me, actually asking me questions, but me asking her questions. But we're going to be talking about diversity and our relationship with nature during the coronavirus pandemic. And then on Thursday, we've got a guy called Silas Olofsson, who's actually from the Faroes, but he's based in Mongolia, and he'll be talking about the birds of Mongolia. So that is pretty interesting, I think, because he's been discovering all these new birds that have never been seen in Mongolia before, and he's a really fantastic photographer as well. And I've been birding with him, and he's got a really interesting way of birding. So we'll be talking about that next week. So, Robert, it's been absolutely fascinating being with you tonight, and I just wish we can spend the rest of the night with you. Stay the night with you, actually, if that's all right. I'd love to do that.
Let's do that. It's been a joy, an absolute joy, and it confirms my powerful wish to go watch some birds with you. Thank you to the audience. Real pleasure for these questions and the kindness out there on the chat as well. So,
well, there's more to come. But anyway, all of you guys, please take care, and you, Robert, as well, and keep looking up.